Okay, thank you. All right, so here we go. Yes, so today we're going to be discussing how we can support our students' disciplinary literacy skills using primary sources within text sets. Okay, and we'll talk about what text sets are and all of that if you maybe aren't familiar. But I would like to know in the chat what your roles are in education. If you're elementary teacher, maybe you're a parent looking to find ways to incorporate history into your child's life, um, higher education, any of those things. I'd love to hear as well. You can also unmute if you'd like to, but feel free to just use a chat if you're happy with that. Oh, okay. Thanks, Rachel. Social Studies Methods course. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, hopefully this will be supportive for you. That would be like my dream job to teach a class like that for incoming teachers. Okay, archivist. Oh, nice. Yeah, lower school. Yeah, I understand what you mean. It really is kind of a tough situation because you have teachers that they have to prioritize those foundational skills like phonics. And sometimes it can be hard, especially from my perspective, my experience with teachers, it can be hard to tell them the importance of like why this matters when we got to teach them actually how to read. But it can work, I promise. I will talk about that. Okay, great. And parents, wonderful. Okay, thank you. Well, I appreciate we have so many diverse perspectives. Oh, in Ontario, very cool. Awesome. Okay, well, we have so many perspectives and knowledge bases we can pull from, so please feel free to add in your own experiences and ideas. I welcome all of that. Okay, so really my purpose today is really to just create a space for us as educators, even if you are higher education or a parent, you are an educator. Everyone is an educator. And here we are exploring how primary sources can fit into text sets, just for the purpose of collaborating together, curriculum planning, especially if you're supporting teachers, maybe the why behind why this matters, and just overall love for history literacy. We all know that in order to understand our world, we not only have to know what's happened in the past, but also how we can communicate what we've learned. And that takes place in reading and writing. So, really, reading and writing are tools to learn. Okay, so for today's session, we're going to have this split into two parts. So first I have a research and evidence section on what are text sets, why they work, some guidelines for text sets, some considerations when you're creating your own, or if you're working with teachers that want to create their own. And then we'll move into more collaboration, exploration opportunities. Specifically, we'll look at the Library of Congress. I'm sure many of you have used the Library of Congress, but we'll talk a little bit more on how that can support text sets specifically, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion. I'm going to try to keep it under an hour because I want you guys to have your break before the next session, and hopefully little Arthur stays asleep for that. So yeah, so here we go. So what are text sets? Has anybody used text sets before, even if it wasn't for social studies? Has anybody, you can raise your hand or you can type in the chat. Has anybody used it before? And if you have in the chat, you could put what topic you used it for. I think I have used it for a lot of different topics, like for science, used it for, oh gosh, like natural disasters. There was a couple in third grade that I did that were on natural disasters. And then American Revolution, which I'll talk about in a minute, my third graders. So there's a lot of really text sets can be incorporated no matter the topic. You just have to find the right text for it. Oh, the Olympics. Okay, that's a good one. I hadn't thought about that. That's a great one. There's so many options with that because you could do like the sports and you could do like the history of Olympics. Yeah, I think tech sets are really very versatile, very flexible, and they can kind of be adapted across grade levels. So with a younger grade level, you might have two or three techs, but with an older grade level, you might have four to six, and you're incorporating them throughout a unit or whatnot. They also can be used in centers and writing activities. There's a lot of options there. Okay, created a text set about flowers and gardens. Oh, I really like that. That's really cool, Bridget. I'd love to hear more about that. Yeah, that's really cool. I'd love to learn more about that, especially with my little one. I would appreciate something, a text set kind of centered on that. Okay, well, thank you for sharing. So, for those who maybe aren't familiar, you just would like a refresher, a text set is a compilation of different types of texts. They span across different genres, different formats, and different modalities. So, what I mean by modalities is they not only can be represented in written books like a picture book or a chapter book, but they can also be in the form of illustrations, images. They can also be videos. Now, in the sense of for our younger kiddos, that's a really great place to start with using videos to supplement like a picture book, for example, or a photograph of a primary source. That any of those things would be great because when we have different modalities, our students will learn in different ways. So it supports their learning in different ways and it strengthens those neurons, I guess you could say, those connections. So, and it also helps with students recognizing text structure as they get older. So, a student that is only reading books that are from narrative perspectives, which historically younger students usually only come across fiction books for the majority rather than nonfiction. Oh, thank you rather than nonfiction, our students don't get that opportunity to really grapple with text structures that are more nonfiction focused and expository. So we use text sets to help support that. They usually integrate both fiction and nonfiction to help that balance between those two different genres, and they embody different perspectives. So, for example, I have a text set here. Let's say I'm teaching third grade, and I want my students to learn about the American Revolution. So I would have maybe my eyewitness book serving as a bunch of different primary sources. I've got photographs, artifacts. I've got a lot of opportunities to pull from. And then I also have a chapter book. Maybe I'm reading this in small groups with my students or in whole group or reading it together. That's more word dense. So we might have more opportunities for phonics or vocabulary there. And then Cloaked in Courage would be my picture book. So a little bit more illustration based, but it's not really fiction because it's based off of a true story. And if you're not familiar, Deborah Sampson was a woman in the American Revolution who took on more of a soldier role, and it explores the perspective of women in the American Revolution and kind of how women back then couldn't fight for their country in the same way that women today can, but how they still did fight for their country. So it's really interesting perspective that maybe Revolutionary War on Wednesday for Magic Treehouse wouldn't typically cover. So in that way, we're expanding our students' knowledge of these topics, which they can then apply as they're evaluating sources, interpreting evidence, applying those discipline-specific skills in history. And another thing that's great with tech sets, it gives teachers the opportunity to explore complex topics that are extremely common to be watered down in the early grades. So, like kindergarten, we're talking about like the first Thanksgiving, and there's a study I'll talk about on that in a minute. The first Thanksgiving, right, where everybody was friends and it was all perfect and there was no issues and happily ever after, right? But we know it was much more complex than that. And maybe there are some parts of that that are true, but not really, right? It's really complex. Now, I'm not saying that you need to delve into all of these huge, these big details that point to all these complexities and things that would not be appropriate for a younger student. But I am saying that if you find certain texts that address these things, and are a little bit more specific in different perspectives, it can really help support their knowledge, and concrete. examples of what it was like back then, using primary sources as well. So that is a little bit of a kind of a back thing with text sets, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Now, the research behind this, why do they work? First, they develop foundational literacy skills, and there has been a couple studies. Cabell et al. In 2025, they did a study that was really cool. It used the core knowledge curriculum, which uses a lot of content-rich texts and text sets. And they found that their students, after that instruction, improved in vocabulary and reading comprehension, which is critical to further reading skills, that reading success in later grades. It also helps students build their oral language capacities because they were discussing about the book, they were incorporating vocabulary from the book. They also had opportunities to write about what they learned. All of these things help support their foundational literacy skills, especially the writing piece, because there's such a connection between reading and writing. So if students are able to write about what they've learned, now I'm not saying that they'll write a whole essay, but they might write a label or a sentence if they're a little bit older. Third graders could write, I would say, a small paragraph to a couple paragraphs, depending on their advance level. That opportunity allows them to think about the word and encode it, which is just basically reading, but opposite the what they want to say. So it really helps develop some of these skills in addition to building their knowledge, which is really cool. In that same sentiment, it supports disciplinary literacy skills, which I've kind of already talked about, but through these connected texts that are connected by topics, details, and things like that, the students can analyze information better. They can practice interpreting that information through discussion, through writing, and they can evaluate that evidence and using different perspectives to do so. So that's really cool. I talked a little bit about how it builds content knowledge. Obviously, if we're reading about different topics in different ways, it's going to expand our knowledge on a number of historical events, different figures, things about them that maybe we wouldn't have known before. And it also helps, like I said, tackle topics that can be generalized for children. Bickford in 2021, I can send, if you're interested, I can send you that study. But he worked with a teacher, I believe she was kindergarten or first grade, I think it was kindergarten. And he worked with a teacher on incorporating some primary sources with texts that confronted this idea of the first Thanksgiving and kind of what it was and some of the background noise going on and things that contributed to it for really young kids. And he talks a little bit too about making those primary sources appropriate for kids and so forth. So that's a really good one if you are interested in that topic in particular. I read that for the first time and like it was like, wow, this is just amazing. It just made me, it was like, wow, this is what I need to do. And that's really what started my research into this area. And then just from a practical standpoint, it really helps facilitate planning. So think about you have a teacher, maybe they have a curriculum, maybe not, but I definitely didn't have a curriculum for social studies. And it really wasn't until one school district that I went to and taught in for third grade that they incorporated a lot of historical based texts as text sets into their ELA block time. And that was wonderful. My students just really enjoy that information. We learn so much. I learned so much. So you can really integrate reading and social studies in a lot of different ways that align with your standards or your benchmarks, whichever you use in the state that you're at. Or teachers that you work with, for example, and the C3 framework guidelines that help with social studies and promoting those discipline specific skills. And you can also use them across centers. You can use them in small groups, writing activities. If you're a parent, you could use them for a number of opportunities to, write letters, to talk about the formatting of letters. You could use them as storyboards. You could have your kiddos, if they're older, create digital presentations using historical topics that incorporate things that they've learned from the text. So there's a lot of opportunities. And there are quite a few texts that are for kids that are around history centered topics that you can that they usually have in the back of the book, like ways to extend learning. So there's some opportunities there if you kind of want to get started. But there's a lot of opportunities for planning, supporting teachers to integrate both of these together. It's not something that's particularly difficult. It's just something you have to kind of get started getting the momentum going. Okay, so let's talk about tech set guidelines. Now, there's a lot of different research out there on tech sets, and specifically like what considerations for tech sets. The two articles I've pulled from, Chasita and Buchanan, those are those listed down here and Lupo et al. They have a couple of considerations and Lupo et al. Has a framework that Autumn is going to share at the end of the session that shares about what to consider when you're incorporating text. Mine are much more simplistic just for the sake of this session, just because I want to just dip our toes in a bit. So let's say I want three texts, okay? And now I know when I say text, I'm talking about I really am saying written text, but the primary source can be a little bit flexible. So we'll talk about that. Okay, so text one is going to be my fiction text. Now, there's an asterisk by it because obviously we want our students to not be reading fantasy stuff because we want them to have knowledge of actual events and facts that are accurate. So when I say fiction, I'm talking about historical fiction that's written maybe from a perspective of somebody that didn't really exist, but is backed up by specific facts and research that the author has done. So let's say I've got a text set centered on Jackie Robinson. My fiction book, if you haven't read this, it's a great book, even if like you are not talking about Jackie Robinson with your kiddos or whatever, if you're just interested. It's an awesome book. It's actually written by his daughter, Sharon, and it tells the perspective of a little boy in a neighborhood, a predominantly Jewish neighborhood that Jackie Robinson moves into, and it's based off a true story of Jackie Robinson moving into this new home with his family, and it's told from the perspective of a little boy. So it's more of a chapter book, not as many images kind of thing, but really rich information. Text two is my nonfiction book. So I have some books. I have a book here. This is a step into reading book. So this would be a book that maybe my students would read in whole group or in small group where they're actively reading themselves. Whereas maybe my chapter book, if it's for younger students, I would maybe do that as a read aloud. I would just read that to them aloud, which is really beneficial. There's a lot of research that shows even reading aloud chapter books supports students' oral language vocabulary. So even if you have really little kiddos, you can still use chapter books, but you just have to chunk it a little bit in smaller chunks. But anyway, that's a side thing. Okay, so we have our nonfiction, and then text three is our primary source. We could use a primary source with written text. Like here, this is a fan mail letter to Jackie Robinson, which is pretty cool. It's a telegram. Or I could use a photograph. I could use a video of him playing baseball. There's a lot of different options. So the primary source could be more flexible. So if you think about it in the sense of like, okay, I've got my fiction, nonfiction, I've got some images, I've got some really good content knowledge, but my primary source, I want to maybe add some excitement into it. That's where the primary source comes in, which is really great because it's kind of like the center of it all. Like it's really exciting to see something from that time period, right? For our students, really love that. Okay, so some other considerations. Does the text honor multiple perspectives? So, based off of what I've told you, would you consider this text set to honor multiple perspectives? And you can share in the chat if you'd like. Yeah, I would say so too. Now, of course, there's a lot of different opportunities to add to it, but we have some different perspectives here that I just want to zone in on. One, we have the perspective of a little boy, and even though he didn't really exist in real life, like it's based off of a true story. And there's a little bit, and you may not know this, but there's a little bit in this story too about the war in Israel at the time in the 1960s, which I didn't know about. So there's some interesting background information as well that's influencing the boy's life, in addition to the segregation issues and the um, really the persecution that Jackie Robinson faced. So there's like some similarities going on, which is a very interesting perspective. Are there different formats or modalities represented? And we do have that, but we could also add maybe some more. Like I said, the video, for example, we could add of him playing baseball, which there are a few, which is really cool. So, and I did that with my third graders and they loved it. We like decorated we decorate I think it was like cupcakes or something where we made like little baseballs out of cup with cupcakes and then we watched the video while we were doing that and we had just finished the Two Doors Down book and yeah, my kids loved it. So there's a lot of extension opportunities there as well that are like kind of novelty that kids just gravitate towards. Okay, so those are our guidelines. So now we're going to move into a bit of an exploration opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and actually, I think what I'll do is I'll continue recording until I get to, I'll let you guys go and find your primary source. But for now, I'm just modeling for you. So I'm going to go on to Library of Congress. Now let's pretend I'm working with a teacher or I am a teacher myself and I need to add to this collection that I have. So let's say I want to add a photograph and I want to look at the Library of Congress to help me with that. So I'm going to show you where I would go. Now, if you're familiar with Library of Congress, that's great, but I'm just kind of modeling for you. So if you do work with teachers, you could kind of do it in a similar way. So let's say I'm going to search on Library of Congress. It's going to take me to the general page here. Now, I could go to teachers, which we'll get to in a moment, but I'm not going to go there yet. Let's say that I want to search a photograph. Now, there's different options here. I am going to click that, and then I'm going to type in Jackie Robinson. Oh, he's already there, and search. And this will get me to some different options here. Now, I could think about, okay, I already have a text-based primary source. I've got the fan mail, right? Now I want something a little bit different. Well, I see here that there, oh shoot, it's really small. That's okay. This is a picture of Jackie Robinson and his family, which is really cool because three doors down, the hero two doors down has got some information about his children. So I could talk about that book and show this photograph. This is what his children really look like. This was his daughter Sharon. She's the one that wrote this book. So I'm making those connections. And my students could even label this photograph. They could maybe talk about the differences between Jackie Robinson's family and their family. Like, there's a lot of opportunities with one photograph. Like, a photo tells a million words, right? So that's an opportunity there. Now I could go back to, oh, hold on. Let me go back here. I'm going to just research. Okay. So there's a lot of opportunities. Jackie Robinson and his son. There's more of like a flyer about Jackie Robinson. Um, yeah, this is the comic book. That's what it is. There's a comic book. So there's a lot of things that we could add to what we already have, and make it really cool. Okay, so that's kind of my modeling of how I would add to the current text set that I have. Now let's go ahead and move into another topic. So this is Abraham Lincoln's presidency. Thank you, Autumn. So Autumn is pasting in the chat a text set book list if you're interested in Abraham Lincoln. Um, I know that it's a topic that usually gets covered in the early grades, but a text set can help really make it complex. So instead of it being more watered down, oh, he was this president, he wore a top hat, those kind of generalized things. That's great, but what else about him? What was he feeling at that time? What did he actually do? What were the perspectives of those around him? So the text set that I've created here, I pulled these two books from that book list that Autumn has put in the chat. So you can take that and tuck it away for later if you're interested in looking at it. But that's a place to start if you're interested in this topic specifically. So let's say I'm talking to my students about Abraham Lincoln's presidency during the Civil War. And I've pulled two texts already. I've got a fiction text, historical fiction text that is heavily researched and based off the perspective of his two sons, which is really cool because um, up until probably a couple years ago, I didn't know he had two sons. I thought he just had one. So that is really cool. It talks about a little also about his melancholy as a father, as a president, which is a really interesting point to discuss with maybe a little bit older kiddos. But I think even younger kiddos would understand if you just briefly discuss it. My nonfiction piece is more facts. This is a National Geographic book, and this has some primary sources as well as illustrations in it too. Okay, so now I'm going to stop recording and I'm going to give you the opportunity to pretend to be in the shoes of a teacher that, let's say you're teaching first grade and you're going to use this text set and you're going to find your own primary source. So hold on, I'm going to stop recording and then